So this is Lavrov. Lavrov was Lavrov gave an interesting breakdown after he's been on this kind of press circuit, and he pointed out that the relationship between I'm just going to play it out, and I'm going to get your take on a question after I play this. And this is this, and this.
Definitely, yes. It was abundantly clear that the esteemed head of the United States and his dedicated team, first and foremost, genuinely wanted to achieve a comprehensive and lasting result that would be long-term, inherently stable, and truly reliable, quite unlike the European counterparts, who at that particular time kept persistently insisting everywhere that only an immediate ceasefire was absolutely needed, and after that they would continue to relentlessly supply weapons to Ukraine.
All right. So just to be very clear, Lavrov is making this point of Donald Trump and his team at Alaska seemed like they were actually looking for a long-term deal as opposed to ceasefire, and that the Russians believed they were doing that in lieu of the Europeans and Zelensky, who just wanted a basic ceasefire so they can load Ukraine up with full of weapons. All right. Fast forward. Then you get this. Trump puts out this tweet. And in this tweet, Trump says, it's very hard, if not impossible, to win a war without attacking an invaded country. It's like a great team sport, a team in sports that has a fantastic defense, but is not allowed to play offense. There is no chance of winning it. Is like that with Ukraine and Russia. Crooked and grossly incompetent Joe Biden would not let Ukraine fight back, only defend. How did that work out? Regardless, this is a war that would have never happened if I were president. Zero chance. Now, the reality of it is Donald Trump tried to say, no, this wasn't a veiled attack, effectively saying Ukraine needs the capability to fight Russia. That's not really what I'm saying. However, he turns around and gives missiles, supposedly. I mean, I've read reports that said these missiles are not even ready yet, and they were purely experimental. But there were two sets of missile types that Trump is apparently sending to Ukraine, of course, paid for by the Europeans in the way that he keeps saying Europe is paying for it, Europe is paying for it. All right. So who is Trump lying to? Is Trump lying to the Europeans, or is Trump lying to the Russians? Because somebody is being misled in this. And I give me your take on that. And the reason why I'm saying it is Lavrov clearly has a certain perception. And maybe Lavrov is just playing up the politics. Fair enough. But Lavrov is coming out to saying, hey, Trump actually wants a real deal. Trump tells the Europeans, yeah, we're going to get security guarantees. And I'm going to give you backing, potentially. And I'm going to give you air cover, potentially, and intelligence, as long as you're willing to put your people into the teeth of the Russian meat grinder. Okay, who is he lying to? He obviously knows that Russia is never going to accept European troops on the ground, which is effectively just NATO on the ground in Ukraine. Give me your take on this.
Well, if anything, Trump is inconsistent. Okay, even in that one thing that you showed, the meat is in the last sentences. This is not my war. It's Biden's war. I'm going to get out of here. The vice president has said just 2 weeks ago, we're done with Ukraine. Forget about it. We're done. You Europeans, you want to help out and buy our weapons? Then be our guests. But we're done. We tried, and we supported Ukraine for as long as, not for as long as it takes, for as long as it took. That's now. Okay. Now, you have this ridiculous spectacle where the U.S. is going to provide weapons to the Europeans, and the Europeans don't have any money to buy those weapons, and the U.S. doesn't have any weapons to sell because their production lines are way, way down. Okay, so no weapons to sell, no money to buy them, and then the Ukrainians have no soldiers to use them, for God's sake. So it's a perfect deal. What can go wrong? Now, the key is, I'm convinced, and I believe that Putin and Lavrov are also convinced, that Trump does want a deal. Now he's going to say contradictory things, and analysts are going to pour over these things. But look, if he wants a deal and Putin has some flexibility, which Lavrov has taken pains to point out, and at the summit, the result was, we have some flexibility, let's deal. Well, that gives me hope, well-based hope, in my view, that they can work something out short of unconditional surrender by the West, NATO, the US, and Ukraine. That serves nobody's interest. We know what that means a couple of years, a couple of decades down the road, okay? So is there a makings of a deal? Of course there is. Now, what about Putin? Doesn't he want to take over all of Ukraine? No. Does he want to take Poland? Is Biden right when he says, you think Putin is going to stop in Ukraine? He's going to go on to Poland? He's going to take the Baltic states? Huh? Where do you get that? There's not a scintilla of evidence. Now, one thing that people can relate to, when Biden says Putin will never stop, well, guess what, folks? You may not know this, but he did stop. When Zelensky sent his best friend to negotiate a deal 2 days after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, they talked in Belarus and then they talked in Istanbul. They did a deal, and the deal was no Ukraine and NATO, ceasefire, and we'll work out the other stuff later, okay? The US and the UK came in and said, no deal. No, you have to fight on here because we'll support you for as long as it takes if you turn down that deal. And they turned it down. The deal was there. The Russian forces around Kiev were withdrawn as a measure to show honesty here. So not only do the Russians not intend to take over all of Ukraine, and the reason for that, for those of you who don't know about Vietnam, is that would that create for Putin and the Russians Vietnam. The people in Western Ukraine hate the Russians in a real way. The ones in the East, not so much. So that will create a Vietnam. So he's not going to. He wants a deal where he can stop with a cordon sanitaire, a buffer zone to protect the Russian forces. But he'll stop. Now, is there any evidence that he wants to go on to Poland? No, he stopped. No, how about the Baltic state? So it's all rhetoric. But the problem is the media. And that's, again, why I'm so glad that you're working hard at this. If people buy this stuff and with not any evidence and with the media part of the military-industrial complex, I mean, let's face it, the media is a kind of a small cost center of mega corporations that make 90% of their income from selling weapons and producing weapons and that kind of thing. So the media is a small cog in this wheel. They're not going to let anybody on that would say things that I say. They'll let people on like General Jack Keane and others and Petraeus, for God's sake, as if they have a good record for being right. Of course, they don't. But they have a really good record of saying what the military-industrial complex wants them to say.
Right. But Donald Trump has a nuclear option. Like, part of his issue, Axios in Atlantic was pointing out that the Trump administration is getting fed up with the Europeans and Zelensky believing that they're doing everything possible to create undue demands, basically demands that they know can never be fulfilled, that the Russians would never accept in order to keep the war going. So if that's true, and if the Europeans, who knows that daddy can walk, meaning they know that at the end of the day, Donald Trump can walk, they don't want that. And so they're very, very submissive to him, despite complaining in the background, we're not going to accept this and blah, blah, blah. But when they get to Trump, of course, it's daddy, don't leave, but we beseech you to do X and Y and Z. Why doesn't Trump just walk? I mean, if Trump says, I'm pulling out the CIA, I'm pulling out Intel, I'm not giving you any more weapons, nor am I selling you any more weapons, this war is over, correct? And so if you believe that Trump wants to over with, wouldn't walking settle this issue?
Yes, in a word, yes. I believe the chances are he's going to walk. Now, do I make that up out of thin air? No. Every time he speaks on the issue, he says, "It's not my war; it's Biden's war. For God's sake, I want to stop people from being killed." And Putin and Lavrov say, we think Trump is sincere. We trust him. Now, Jamal, after all the betrayals, all the ceasefires that were broken, all the European laughing about guaranteeing these ceasefires, and that they we only signed on that to supervise these ceasefires so that the Ukrainians could keep training and being weaponized to NATO standards. And they laugh about that. So after all those betrayals, for these guys to still say so. So look, I got a half century of experience looking at what Soviet and Russian leaders say. There got to be a reason that they say that. They're trying to tell the rest of the Russian people, look, we know what happened before. Putin has said explicitly, I was naive dealing with these guys, trusting them before, but now he's talking about trust again. So here you have it. Those, I call it, that scene in the White House where those 7 Europeans were drawn up like school children in front of the teacher's desk there. I call that the Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs, okay? Snow White, I hate to compare Snow White to Trump or vice versa, but okay, you have the 7 Dwarfs there, right? Now, in the middle of that meeting where he was telling them what's going to happen on Ukraine and explaining what happened in Alaska, I said, I'm sorry. I'm calling Mr. Putin right now. We arranged that I was going to call. So could you leave the room for a while? So-and-so will reach out there. Could you just wait in the next room, okay? And he's there for half an hour talking to Putin on the phone. Yeah. And then he says, let him back in, let him back in. Okay, and they sit down there dutifully. Now, do they have the wherewithal to help Ukraine? No, they don't, okay? And why? Well, you talked about Big Daddy. Now, your listeners or your viewers probably know that comes from the Secretary General of NATO. His name is Mark Rutte. He's Dutch, right? And the last NATO summit, he says before all the cameras, "Oh, Daddy's here! Welcome, Daddy!" When Trump comes in, see? Now, here's my message to Americans. Daddy is a deadbeat. Now, we know what a deadbeat is, right? Okay. Daddy ain't going to pay any alimony, and he's not going to pay any child support for those 7 children, okay? I mean, it's clear as a bell. The vice president has said it explicitly. We're done with supporting, financially supporting Europe. So where are the Europeans going to get the money? Or where are they going to get the arms? Well, I've already said there aren't any arms to sell, and there's not any money to buy them, and there's not enough people in Ukraine to demand them. I mean, the whole thing is months away. Now, the craziness is that people like the British have such a big stake in this that I fully expect they're considering a false flag attack blamed on the Russians so that we can get into what they might consider just a little war in Europe. My God, that's crazy. But I think the chances of that happening may be less than even, but we ought to be alert for it because we shouldn't let ourselves be led by the nose by the British anymore.
Right.
That's been too often the case, and it's led to disaster.
So just to be clear, you think Trump is ultimately going to walk. Why hasn't he done so already if that's the case?
Well, because of Rubio, because of Kellogg, he had to appoint, or he felt he had to appoint, neocons in major positions. Now, he deals with the Russians through Witkoff, who, right, about 10 times as intelligent as, well, that's damning with faint praise, but he's 10 times intelligent as Rubio or Kellogg. I'm just very, very clear. So, yeah, he's got Lindsey Graham, for God's sake, who wants bone crunching sanctions, and they're delirious. They're delusional because they've already got all the sanctions that they want, that they could have on Russia. Russia has found really a good way to deal with them. The only positive GNP in the whole of Europe is Russians. It's been over 4%, it'll be 2% next year, and the rest of the people are in recession. So, right, people have to be realistic here and say, well, it looks like the handwriting's on the wall. What could Zelensky? Zelensky is a real protege of the British. They've been writing his speeches. They've been doing lots of stuff there. in coordination with the CIA, but not always, okay? So
Mhm.
if Trump tells the CIA, look, knock it off, don't give them any more intelligence, and the weapons can't come because there are no weapons, well, a couple months down the road, it's going to be some sort of deal made between Putin and Trump. Let's hope both of them survive long enough to make that deal. I have real questions as to what would happen if Trump were done away with, as they tried to do twice already, or if Putin had some sort of fatality. That's always possible. And my God, I don't think, I think I'll say this outright. I think we're very fortunate in having a person so measured, so perspicacious,
Oh, cool. Yes.
so careful about not provoking the West as Putin has been. I think we have to give him credit for that, as well as dragging Russia out of abject poverty,
Agreed.
out of being exploited by the Wall Street guys and the Treasury guys there when the Soviet Union fell apart, building up their army to make it the most powerful army in the world, really. In some respects, dwarfing our capabilities, like with hypersonic missiles. In other words, I've been around a while. This is the first time, I think, that the Russians outmatch us in weaponry, except for strategic, ICBMs. There we still have sort of parity. But in conventional forces, in hypersonic missiles, which do not have to carry a nuclear head, but can, okay, it's no match anymore. Another thing I'd like to adduce here to give some perspective. I'm an old guy, and I studied graduate school when George Kennan was a big guy. George Kennan was the ambassador to Moscow. He crafted the containment policy where we're going to stop the Russians from taking over the rest of Europe way back in the day, right? That was after World War II. 1948. He wrote a memorandum. It was the first policy memorandum written by the State Department policy people. He was the first chairman. I printed it out because I thought it might give some context. It's very brief. It's just one paragraph. Here it is. And bear in mind what the situation is now in China, with all those people congregating not only for the Shanghai Cooperation Council, but also for the 80th anniversary of victory in the Far East. Okay, here's George Kennan, 1948, policy set, first policy paper. Quote, we, the United States, have about 50% of the world's wealth, but we only have 6.3% of its population. Now, our real task in the coming period is to devise a pattern of relationships which will permit us to maintain this disparity. To do so, we will have to dispense with all sentimentality and daydreaming, and our attention has to be concentrated everywhere on our immediate national objectives. We shall cease to talk about vague and unreal objectives such as human rights, the raising of living standards, and democratization. The day is not far off when we are going to have to deal in straight power concepts, period, end quote. Okay, so that set the post-war policy. We emerged pretty much unscathed. Europe was destroyed. We had 50% of the world's wealth, but only 6.3% of its population. What's the percentage now? Oh, wow. We have 4% of the world's population, okay? And as to control of the world's resources, well, look at those people. Look at those people convening in China now.
Yep.
They dispose of 43% of the world's population, China, India, and the others, okay? And they have they have most of the world's wealth as well. So this was right after World War II. You could understand it, although it just disappointed me that Kennan didn't give a rat's patootie about human rights, or what else did he call sentimentality, or what is it? So we have to daydreaming. Straight power concepts. Okay, now what needs to happen is people realize we are no longer the hegemon. Okay, now try as we may, it's not one against one. Russia and the United States, Soviet Union, United States. I used to say two against one, China and Russia, but now it's three against one. We have so alienated India.
Yeah,
there's a smidgen more population than China, whatever it is,
5 billion.
Yeah, so we've alienated all those folks gratuitously. 50% tariffs on India. For what? So anyhow, this group that is starting today, yesterday, I guess, in Chinese time, in Shanghai, will be represented at the big march, the big victory thing on the 2nd or 3rd of October, depending on which time. And that's going to be so big. Yeah, it's the 3rd, but it'll be the 2nd in me. It's the 3rd.
Oh, right. Time zone. I'm sorry.
That's the this was a victory over Japan. Japan is not sending anyone, by the way. They feel it's not nice to talk about victory over the Japanese. The Japanese occupied China, Manchuria, especially,
Korea,
since 1931. Okay, how many Chinese were lost in World War II?
It's like 30 million
people. Yeah, right. And we know that the Russians lost 27 million. These are people. Now, how much did we lose? Well, last count, 420,000. Okay. And they were all service people, of course, all the servicemen and women. So do the math, for God's sake. These people know what war is like. And the Japanese still have their noses out of joint. Why do you celebrate defeating us? Well, if I were out there, I would be just, I grew up, we were prejudiced against the Japs, as we call them, and I regret, all the racism involved. But they certainly give us a lot of cause as immature youths to be talking about the Japs, all the films and everything. So they were that way, and it took a lot of American Marines to rebuff them. The only regret that I have really is that there was no need to drop those atomic bombs. Everybody knows that who tunes into your program. It was not only to keep Russia out or warn Russia of our capability, it was also pure and simple racism. Now, why do I say that? Well, Truman never referred to African Americans by any other word than the N word, okay? Mm-hmm. And he had a Secretary of State name. His name was Jimmy Burns. He was from South Carolina, okay? And he was equally prejudiced. So when MacArthur, when Eisenhower, when Admiral Halsey all came to President Truman and said, don't do it, for God's sake, don't drop that bomb. Or do a demonstration out in the Pacific, but don't kill tens of thousands of people. Truman said, that's all right. We can do it. And he relied on his Secretary of State, Jimmy Burns, and he went and did it. Now, my point is that the reason Truman and Burns could take this so cavalierly was, pure and simple racism. Now, I have nothing against the great state of South Carolina, but there was a general who ran our war in Vietnam. His name was Westmoreland, and he was from the great state of South Carolina. And he used to call those folks gooks and, whatever, okay. And, there's Lindsey Graham. He's a senator from the great state of South Carolina. So there must be something in the water down there. I don't know. I don't want to accuse anybody of being racist, but if they're not racist, there's something else wrong. So what I'm saying here is that there are a lot of factors here that Americans don't really appreciate because the history books don't have them. I check with my grandchildren, okay? This is interesting. The three that live in Oakland, they knew that it was not necessary to drop the atomic bomb. We had the codes broken. We knew that all we had to say to the Japanese, look, we would hang up your emperor on a street lamp, okay? You could keep your damn emperor. Just stop the war. And it would have stopped like that. We knew that. But Truman, no, he wanted to demonstrate this bomb. And if those people didn't look like us, well, it didn't matter so much, did it? We see that having to do with the Palestinians as well. It's kind of sort of like our cardinal sin here. We know what we did to the Native Americans, and we know what we did to the people that were enslaved and brought from Africa. We know all that, but we don't really have that in our history. Anyhow, what I was going to say, the three from Oakland knew that. The ones from Virginia, the ones from North Carolina, the ones from where else? From Massachusetts. No, they had the old history book. They knew that we had to drop those bombs to save hundreds of thousands of American lives, because when we invaded Japan, then they would fight and kill 100,000 more Marines. That was BS, and we have lots of BS still going on. The history thing is a big thing for me. I know a lot about the last 86 years of history.
Yeah.
Because I was born 1 week before World War II. Okay.
Yeah.
So I've been around, and I know a lot of that history, and I've learned along the way about history before that. I didn't learn much from my history book. Now I know which ones to consult and which ones to remind me of what really happened. So, I appeal to your viewership to make sure you know the people's history of the United States,
Yes.
and what Oliver Stone has written and all that kind of stuff, because that way people can understand what's going on now and why the Russians, why after the war was won, or even before the war was won in 1945, Winston Churchill was advising Franklin Delano Roosevelt, hey, now we have to go against the Russians. Now we have this atom bomb. Now we finish off the Russians. Our allies.
Also, by the way, MacArthur
What's
also.
that?
MacArthur also was like, we can take the Russians down while we have the chance. Yeah, they were thinking.
Yeah, they tried that out in the Far East. So that's the hegemon's attitude. What I'm saying now is it's nowhere near what it was like after the war. And these people, to their credit, are not ganging up on us. The Chinese are saying to us, look, how about leaving us alone? I mean, how about a win-win? That's what we Chinese are used to. And by the way, we haven't invaded another country in a long time, but if you invade us, that's the end of you. And we have people talking about defending Taiwan, the country of Taiwan. Well, 55 years or so ago, or longer, it was 1972, we recognize it's just one China, and Taiwan is a part of China. So if the Chinese invade Taiwan, well, listen, folks, they're not going to do that because it's inevitable. No matter how many missiles we put in Taiwan, it's going to be eventually joined to the Chinese mainland. And so the Chinese are not going to start a war there. Whether we start a war with our battleships and aircraft carriers and all that kind of stuff, that's another matter. But the Chinese have the ascendancy there. The only reason that China is the main enemy now is because we need to build more ships, more jet aircraft, more, because China is a big threat. Biden, 2 months into his office, China aspires to be not only the economic hegemon, but the military hegemon, and that's not going to happen on my watch. Okay, so he's reading from George Kennan.
Yep.
But wake up, Biden. you're a cold warrior, but there's no more percentage in this kind of bipolar existence. It's multipolar now. And my first account at the CIA, my first analysis portfolio was relations between the Soviets and the Chinese. Okay. Now, in those days, they were shooting at each other across the border. China was claiming, with some good fundamental reason, 1.5 million square kilometers of Siberia. Okay, there were conflicting in all the Communist Party and everything else. So I was telling people, look, they hate each other. And I was telling people, like everybody else, they probably always hate each other. But maybe if more enlightened Chinese and Russians come in, they'll see how stupid it is to sacrifice. And that happened finally. And now we have them in an alliance where they don't call it a military alliance. But you bet, this is not going to happen, but you bet that if the Russians started to lose in Ukraine, you could expect some real dust-ups in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Straits. And then where will we be? We don't have enough troops to put into Europe, much less into Asia. So there's a lot of megalomania here and delusionary thinking. And of course, Trump is susceptible to that, and that's a problem because as the Russians look on Trump, they say, well, he's mercurial, he changes his mind all the time, and he doesn't know anything about war. He had a bone spur. He had deferments, and none of his family ever served. So we have to be really careful with this guy. We have to cajole him, but we have to also convince him that if he's ready for a deal, if he wants us to help him, we Russians, by buying and applying enough lipstick to this pig of defeat in Ukraine, we'll do that. Sure. For a deal, we'll do that. We get a buffer zone there. We get our core interests respected, and we'll have a new European security arrangement. And you should like that too, Mr. Trump. Oh, yeah, I think I like that too. Yeah. And it isn't my war and I want to stop killing a lot of Ukrainians and Russians too.
I got to be honest. I don't think he cares about the last part. I do think he cares about. I don't think he cares about the last part. I don't think Trump cares about Ukrainians dying.
No, but the rhetoric is effective. I mean,
yeah,
look,
exactly.
Now it's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I mean, my God, we haven't talked about Gaza. That is so heinous. If I ever thought that I would be part of a democracy, the head of which was not only condoning, but arming, supplying, financing genocide and forced starvation by Israel.
Yeah, it's
I would say, no, this would never happen in my country, but that's it. Okay. And then, Jamal, if you try to piece together why Trump seems to be a tool in Netanyahu's hand, I would like to speculate that there's another reason, and it's called blackmail.
You think so?
I do think so. Yeah, I can't prove it, but look at this Epstein thing. Huh? Look at it. It's very, very curious how all this stuff is going down, and we have a Mossad, an ex-Mossad, that's the Israeli intelligence service, like the CIA. We have one of those guys saying to prominent interviewers, if Trump would only come clean, if he'd only say, okay, release all those things, it's going to be terrible for me, very embarrassing, but it would stop the genocide. Well, please do that, Mr. Trump. Please do that. His name is Ben Menashe, is his name. And he's been a source of very, very important scholars and reporters, one of which was Robert Parry, the late Robert Parry, who tutored me on how to be a journalist rather than an intelligence officer, and found Ben Menashe a very lucrative source on the October surprise. The one where
Interesting.
the Iranians were persuaded by the likes of Bill Casey, head of the CIA later, not to release those hostages until Reagan was sworn in on.
Right.
So I
Right.
mean, so he's an experienced source. For him to say that sort of thing, almost come to tears. He said, this is a moral thing, for God's sake, Mr. Trump, please just out with it. Then you'll be hurt, but you'll feel a lot better for it, and you'll stop the killing. My God, look at it. The interviewer is a fellow named let's see.
I'm going to look him up.
I'll think of it. Yeah, I'll think of it in a second.
Yeah.
It's going around now. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
Atanzi. Yeah. Atanzi, I think it is. Attansi.
Oh, I know him.
Yeah.
I've interviewed him. Yeah, I know him.
He's very good. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, I'm going to look that up. I'm going to check that out. I mean, between a person being injured versus genocide, I think the individual, especially somebody like Trump with his level of hubris and mendacity and ego, I think he is probably going to just continue all of these people getting killed and starved. I feel you, though. It's horrendous. It has been a learning experience for me. Maybe one that's far darker than I would have wanted, but it's real. It's honest. I mean, at the end of the day, nobody got involved. We've watched this on our screens, on our social media. We've watched people just get taken apart. And we backed it.
When I was a kid, as I say, I was born just before the war, but when I was an adolescent, I learned about all this stuff. And I remember thinking, 12-year-old, my God, genocide, killing 6 million Jews. When I get big, I'm going to do everything I can to stop that from happening again. When I get big, well, I'm big. And on every program that I'm interviewed on, or every speech that I make, or everything I write, I always start with the genocide in Gaza. My God, that's heinous. And if it has to do with blackmail, it's heinous squared, for God's sake,
Yeah.
And are we powerless? No, I can't believe we're powerless to do it. We don't have to be obedient Germans. We need to take action, get off our sofas and go to our congressional representatives and say, look, you've got to stop this thing. Look what's happening. You've seen the pictures. This time we have the pictures, right? So that should be enough for an uprising of some kind where we can say to our leaders, look, knock it off. I'll just mention this thing. Technology also often is the key to revolution, okay? Now, I'll just say, well, telegraph was one, but here's one more recent one. When Ayatollah Khomeini was in Paris, okay? And there was lots of unrest in Iran because of the dictator they had there who was really bad, the Shah, okay? So Khomeini had this new technology. It was, try to explain it to stay, there were two reels here and a tape, but it was called a tape recorder. And then they put it down into cassette. And he would make these fiery speeches. And the cassettes would get to every minaret in Iran. And they'd be blasted from the top of the minaret. Okay. Well, cause of resolution. Okay. Now, we all have these, what are they? These
smartphones.
Things, what we call cycles. And, even though they kill, even though the Israelis murder journalists, 200 of them now, 200, okay? Well, enough of these people with these kinds of phones here that are recording what's going on. Now, if you want to see some of the emaciated children, some of the people who are being starved to death, all you have to do is be interested enough to look at those things. So the evidence is there in a way that it's never been before because of the new technology. For God's sake, let's get up, Americans. Let's stop it, because if we can't stop this, then we're really not a democracy. Our forefathers would be shamed by our behavior in becoming bystanders instead of active in opposing evil.
Ray McGovern Ray McGovern, American political activist, former Central Intelligence Agency officer. McGovern was a CIA analyst from 1963 to 1990. In the 1980s, chaired the National Intelligence Estimate and participated in preparing the president's daily briefs. Ray, I have watched you for years. I thank you for this. I really do.
Thank you, Jamal.
Deeply appreciate it. You be safe, okay?
Thank you very much.